left of Barack Obama, which is really unusual to the mainstream of America right now. And so liberals are saying that socialism is more fair, 61-29, and it's with voters who are under 40, they're more likely to say that socialism is more fair, so there's a generational difference. So you've got a battle where usually the two issues that decide who's going to win the next presidential election, security and economy, you got one where one party's going off to the left towards socialist policies that Americans haven't seen, because older Americans don't understand it because they grew up in the Cold War and against communism, etc. Younger Americans, they're getting a nicer view of this without that. I mean, they don't live in Venezuela. They don't understand Cuba. They haven't been there. And you know, since the Iron Curtain went down, you don't have that specter of what the older Americans are used to, or their view of socialism. So you got a battle coming right now where that underlies one of the big things about the presidential and congressional decisions next year, where one party's going off to a place that the majority of Americans don't agree with. So with that, I mean, right now, Trump, what he's got going in his favor are the two things that usually help Republicans, peace and prosperity. So if the economy keeps growing, I don't agree with a lot of Republicans who say it's booming, but if it keeps growing, that's a good thing. If the United States stays at peace in a dangerous world, that's a good thing too. So with that, I'm ready to punt.
Okay, so we'll give have each panelist give their overall view on the economy, and then we'll go to we'll make a segue to the college admission scam, which is kind of, I think, in some ways, maybe, I'm not sure how Akil feels about it, but it's kind of dovetails to inequality, because I think what's trickling down when you talk about this wealth effect over the past decade, was trickling down, higher prices and fewer slots for these elite colleges. So we'll start with Akil in terms of just a general viewpoint on the economy, because you work with kids on a regular basis. So.
Viewpoint on the economy. I think my viewpoint on the economy is, well, let's see it. So it's interesting, just the perspective that you present, because I'll just leave it interesting. I think there's the very notion that there's peace and prosperity is contrary to the experience of many people in this country. Right? So it's of course coming from the white man. Peace and prosperity is what you see in this country. The Trumps of the world are accumulating more and more and disenfranchising or excluding many from the economy. And that's played out in a lot of different ways. One, in the college scandal, that's one example, and I think that's a microcosm of what's going on in America writ large. So it's really interesting that you're seeing, it's all happy and flowers and roses, and to me, I'm seeing the other end of it. I'm seeing that it's the wealthy scamming the system in every way possible to accumulate more, and leaving more and more people scrambling for scraps.
I just think, let me just interrupt, because what's different is, now I agree with you, there's inequality in society and things could be better, I absolutely agree. And since I poll all the time, I'm always seeing, I see things like a Republican should be aspiring for more African American vote than just double digits. I used to work for a lot of people who would get 20, 25%. Governor Deal is lieutenant governor who ran on criminal justice reform, school choice, and on the growing economy. In Georgia, he got reelected with double digits, and his lieutenant governor got 20% of the vote among the African Americans. The strategy against Jimmy Carter's grandson, who was running against as a Democrat, they were trying to hold us to 5%, which is what Brian Kemp got against Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams,
through his illegal manipulation of the system and disenfranchisement of voters.
They had a higher turnout. You had a higher turnout of African Americans.
Through illegal means and disenfranchisement of voters and stopping people from being able to vote.
It came out higher. But look.
Through illegal means of stopping people from being able to vote.
I'm telling you,
wasn't Kemp the one who, perhaps I'm confusing Kemp and the other guy, who was just taken to court and sued because of his illegal acts.
I'm talking about Governor Deal. He ran the state and he did a good job. He was term limited out. But in the meantime, what I'm saying to you is that it's growing, and you can
What's
see
growing?
the economy's growing. It's not booming for the working class, but it's better because it was flat for the last 10 years. It was flat. It wasn't a good economy. 2008, the Great Recession, was bad, but now it's
Created
growing.
by rich people scheming.
And they're not just Republicans. Let me tell you,
I say Republicans, but that's the majority of them.
No. There's plenty of others, but let me tell you,
But that's the majority of
the
them.
Trump economy, what you're looking at in the present tense is most of the benefits of more jobs and growing wages have been among working class, manufacturing, better, and that's a good goal.
And I'm not sure that that's true. I believe I've seen
It's true. It's a
other
fact.
things. And I'm not, I don't study politics for a living, but I have paid attention to things beyond the Republican point of view, which is what you seem to be bringing.
Yeah.
There's my understanding is a lot of the economic effects right now are rollovers from what was in place before and the recovery from the recession. So to claim and try to attach that to Trump seems false.
No, I mean we had a recovery, but it was a slow recovery, slowest recovery after a recession. But now it's getting better and growing stronger. So it's an improvement.
Okay, so Akil, do you have anything else you want to say? I think
You have the last word.
on the economy?
The economy, that's not my area of expertise.
But it's funny. It's interesting because
So I find it interesting just in terms of the numbers that he's throwing out there, unqualified, such as who's the polling of socialism versus capitalism. I would wonder if the people you polled could even define socialism accurately. So,
well, actually, that's interesting. We'll get into that later. But when you say you're not an expert in the economy, the other thing is that you actually work. You're in the economy because you work with kids on a regular basis. So
This is true.
you know these stories. I can talk about the economy, about statistics and that type of stuff, but I don't work with kids on a regular basis. So I don't. You know the stories, and you know how the stories have changed over the past decade.
Mhm.
When a kid comes to you to help with testing service and where they want to go to college, and maybe there's more angst to them than it was 10 years ago. So you work with kids, and you know these stories. So you are in the economy. You probably on
Yes.
the ground in that
mean,
perspective.
we're all in the economy in that way, but I'm not an economist.
I understand.
I'm not someone who studies
I understand.
the financial perspective of that. So I'm saying that there's a point of view that I have that is different because it's not driven by data per se.
Okay, let's go to the land barrier.
Yes, I would say that there are certain benchmarks we use to say that the economy is growing, and I think there's a problem with taking a national economy and saying the economy is growing. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that there are people in other areas the economy is not growing and they're getting left behind. Likewise, a lot of the economy that's growing is debt-based. So we have a lot of people in the financial industry, and I'm calling it the financial industry, the printing of money, the lending of money, that's growing, and there's a lot more Ferraris out there and Lamborghinis, but the guy that's trying to make a living and be able to afford his rent, I think there's a problem with that. We see in Brooklyn, I live in downtown Brooklyn, I lived on the Bowery for many years, and I moved to Brooklyn a few years ago. And downtown Brooklyn, Willoughby, we're near the Barclays Center, which is a whole other conversation we could have. There is a lot of debt-based economic growth, and there are so many high-rise 40, 50-story apartment buildings going up there, and I think it's happened a little too fast for the income that people are having to be able to afford those things. And when they do an affordable housing project, it's the middle-class taxpayer that foots the bill, because the developer gets the same profit, even more profit. So if we look at a building that was maybe a 4 or a 6-story little tenement building or a brownstone, and now we see they tear 3 of those houses down and put a 50-story building up, that piece of land represents the 150 apartments are on it now instead of 6 apartments. So what we see is the rent going up, okay? So my question is, what benchmarks are we using to say the economy is growing? I think a lot of it is debt-based. And I think that there's a major flaw in looking at a national economy, because the money is being made in certain places and other geographical areas are not. Our cities are still declining. And so, like we're becoming a supply chain, not a supply chain, a supply economy. For example, under the English mercantile system, when we were colonies, we were only allowed to export natural resources. The whole Erie Canal was built on that. We could export fur, timber, and if we wanted to buy a cabinet, we had to wait for it to go to England, be refined, and buy it back. So we could say the economy was growing, but that was fine if you were a subsistence farmer or a trapper or a logger, but really you weren't making a lot of money unless you were in the stock market and making money on that. So as a supply region, and this is known throughout the world, in Uruguay, for example, in the first half of the century, Uruguay was exporting meat to Europe. And they built their whole economy based on the supply of meat. And they even had a welfare system for people that got left behind. So after World War II, France, England, and the other European countries started raising their own meat. And Uruguay never developed a more sophisticated economy. Their eggs were all in one basket, so to speak. So when there was no more market for their meat, they started borrowing money to make subsidies, and their economy went down. It's still down today. What we are supplying now are arms. We are the largest arms dealer in the world, and Trump recently said to Japan, for example, we and other countries that are our client countries, we want those countries, our clients, to spend 2.5% of the gross national product on arms. And where are they going to buy those arms? They're buying them from us. So I would say banking and arms and pharmaceuticals are definitely growing. But if you're not in an industry that is related to that, you're not necessarily growing, and that's the problem with a national benchmark. You know, the nation is growing, but we already know that somebody owns 40% of all the wealth, so it doesn't help the other 60%, you know, or 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth, whatever the numbers are, you probably know better than I do. That is used as a benchmark, but it doesn't help the other people. That's the issue. And also people's perception of what a free economy is. If I mentioned the arms business, there are things called barriers to entry. Okay, I want to go make bombs now. I can't get into that business. It's already controlled by a certain group. So it's not a free economy at all. There's subsidies to the big agricultural businesses, such as Monsanto. Things are skewed in their favor. So I'm not so sure that the economic growth that we look at and read about is helping everybody. We know it's not.
I think what you're, from a 20,000 foot level in terms of like the GDP, I think what you're describing is the government is trying to spur business fixed investment in this animal spirits, like whether it's real estate development or growing plant equipment for new machinery or new auto parts or what have you. They're spurring business fixed investment, but the consumer is weak. Who's going to consume all these investments that, you know, big businesses is investing in? You follow? So I think right. So I think that's kind of what I think.
True,
you know,
but when you do invest in things, so for example, we have to look at the whole population, and there are a lot of primitive people in this country. Okay, and they're living in a primitive sort of way. So if you invest in machinery, you might replace the employment for 100 people because you have now a combine that can harvest 150 acres an hour, for example. I'm just using that as an example. So you're displacing people, you're taking away their jobs. With ATM machines. I'm not saying we should have a bank teller. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a bank teller. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't have a toll collector. But when you have you have your Easy Pass, you're replacing those people and not finding jobs for them.
Right.
So, but we're still injuring the economy. The guy that makes. Here's a New York City subway ad. There was if you go, you see they have the countdown clocks. Now I'd like to see how much those countdown clocks cost. But then they showed the guys cleaning the subway. It was a 1981 Dodge truck. Yeah. You know, and so that fellow that's cleaning that subway does not have the latest equipment. Right. But meanwhile, the subways are still filthy.
Right. That's a big problem.
But there was a lot of economic growth to make those clocks and computers But who benefits from that? That's really the question I think that I ask, you know?
You know what's interesting? I saw a report in Axios, a news service yesterday.
I'm sorry?
Axios, it's a news service.
Yes.
And they said the economy is growing faster in those parts of the country that flipped from Obama to Trump.
Yes.
And what it is, it's energy-based, manufacturing-based, and it's agriculture-based.
Yes.
Now, I think that reinforces what you're talking about, and I agree with you, it's not an even recovery, but a faster growing economy is good. And the other part too is the technology sector is still growing.
It's growing incredibly, but I don't know who benefits from it. Just like I said, those countdown clocks, you know.
Yeah.
If you go to Tokyo, there's a little piece of paper that gives the train schedule. Primitive, but the trains are on time and they're clean. And the person that's working, the conductor or the person that's sweeping, cleaning is a normal middle-class person. That's the thing I'm worried about. So the financial sector is making a ton of money, but you know,
And the technology
if you look
sector
up-
is tied into that because
Yes.
the growth of the technology sector is in large part driven by, you know, the next flashy new app, the Silicon Valley, and the conditions of business and banking is enabling that with venture funding.
Exactly.
You know, so it's no longer small businesses succeeding. It's now those who have access to the venture capitalists and those who have access to Silicon Valley. So it's changed from the old boys network sitting around smoking, but it's not opening access to more people. The economy is still fairly narrowly, it's actually worse than it was 30 years ago in terms of who's accessing the biggest opportunities that currently exist.
Exactly. So when you have these venture capital firms that take Snapchat public, Uber public, Lyft public, a lot of these companies don't even make money. Snapchat doesn't make money, but the venture capital firms are making a mint because they're taking the companies public, and a lot of it's predicated on the stock market being, Dow being
Somebody makes money,
27.
right? The founders
Yeah.
make their money and they get out.
I'm saying, but if you were
That's the problem.
but it's almost like you have to keep it to keep the business fixed investment up. You have to almost have to keep the stock market high to justify these valuations for these companies. Also justify some of the valuations for the real estate. And I keep thinking about the 80s, which I studied a lot in college, when you had some of these people in Japan who were trapped in flats in downtown Japan. They bought up flats for like $1 million, and they had to still, and the real estate's underwater. They had to keep working past the age of 65 because they were trapped in this investment. I mean, do you see something like that happening in the real estate market?
Well, it's happened a lot of times. I've been in a lot of cycles and had different relationships as a property manager back in the 80s, as a real estate appraiser. I've done air rights deals at the hotels in Manhattan. You know, I've seen all of it pretty much. Since 1982, I've been a broker, an appraiser, a builder, and been concentrating on making people wealthier and then taking a look at, wait a minute, if you're making somebody wealthier, there's a certain amount of wealth produced that you're actually taking that from somebody else. And I'm not disparaging hard work and earning things, but I have an issue with unearned income, and I think a lot of that growth is based on that. And if you look at the gross national product, debt is equal to the gross national product right now. It's 100% of the GNP, 100%. So if you have a $1 trillion economy, you have $1 trillion worth of debt. So I think that there's a problem with that. And now people are even the tenancies of certain buildings are being checked out by the bank. If you don't pass muster, then you can't live there.
Right.
So what happens to the person that is just, they're hard work, but they're just not making that kind of money?
Right.
That's a problem.
I analyze a lot of companies, and I complain about the fact that a lot of them are over leveraged, like General Electric, like Tesla. Some of them made acquisitions like 8-10 years ago.
Yeah.
And some of the value of these deals aren't worth what they were 8-10 years ago. Some of them have used debt to buy back stock, like General Electric. And now that their some of their businesses, like power generation business, is slowing, they have a hard time repaying the debt. So there's a lot of corporate debt out there, and it's almost like we almost have to keep the engine going for them to service the debt. But 20,000 foot level, this is my take on the economy. So you look at the last the jobs data from April, record unemployment. Not record, but very low unemployment, lowest in like 49 years, like 3.6%, which is phenomenal, very eye-popping. You have wage growth above 3%. So the president hitting on all the the blame, low unemployment, wage growth. It's almost like a Goldilocks economy in that, from a statistics standpoint, because you have wage growth but you don't have inflation. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell looks at is what he calls personal consumption expenditures X energy, and he wants it to grow like 2% as the target. It was growing 2% in the first half of 2018. Finally, after a decade of money printing, finally get it to 2%. And the last couple of months, it's been like maybe 1.8%, 1.7%, 1.6%. So it's kind of slowing. So it's almost like you can keep adding stimulus, cutting taxes, keep rates low, and not grow inflation. So why not keep doing it though? That's kind of logic. But the flip side is that, I talked to John about this last night, you have about 96 million people who are not in the workforce, so you have a labor participation rate around 62.8%. It hasn't been this low since the Carter administration. And my favorite president, president I really admired was Jimmy Carter. I love Jimmy Carter to death. He would talk, come on TV, he'd talk, and I would be glued to the TV like this. I thought he was talking to me personally. And so when he lost, I was almost in tears. When he lost to Reagan, I was almost in tears. But part of what did him in, obviously, was the Iran hostage crisis didn't help. We were I think in fourth grade, and we found out that Iran had kidnapped some people over there. And then we saw Ayatollah Khomeini come on TV. He had a beard down here. I'm like, that's the guy who pumped us? That guy. We couldn't believe it. Like, what are we waiting for? Let's go get this guy. But the Iran hostage crisis didn't help, but also the fact that he had a high unemployment rate and low labor participation rate. It was like in the 60 to 63% during his tenure. And then you had OPEC playing around with oil prices, so you had prices going up, so like stagflation. But he couldn't do much about it because OPEC was raising the oil prices. And the country pulled together. You have some guys, your license plate, and it was an odd number or even number, you can get gas that day. And the country pulled together because the president asked us to. But all those things kept coming together. It was like almost like economic quagmire that it was hard for him to overcome. If you look at today's economy, you have a very low labor participation rate, just like Jimmy Carter. You have 96 million people not in the labor force. It was like 64% when Bernanke was the Fed chairman. He said it was a national crisis. So it was 64% in 2009, 2010, it's even lower now. So if it was a national crisis in 2010, 2011, it's even worse now. And then you also have, while you have a low labor participation rate, you also have rising prices for things that we need, just like during the Carter administration. Tuition is rising 3 times the rate of inflation, college tuition. You have rising costs for drugs, you have rising costs for rent, you have rising costs for real estate. And so you have, what the kids are complaining about today is that their rent won't stop going up and tuition won't stop going up. And so in a lot of ways you have what we're trumpeting as a great economy. In a lot of ways it mirrors, in my opinion, mirrors Jimmy Carter's economy. The difference is that OPEC was a pariah in the 80s because they were raising oil prices. Today I think they've been replaced by oligarchs or robber barons who are buying up all the land, raising the prices for rent. The drug companies raising the prices for drugs because a lot of them are publicly traded and they have a high stock price. To justify the high stock price, to justify acquisitions that they overpaid for 6-7 years ago, they have to raise the price of drugs. So a lot of it's not necessarily because R&D costs are rising, because they kind of trap the stock price is too high or overvalued. They have to service the debt, so they keep raising the prices for drugs to service the debt, or to justify this high stock price, what have you. So I think in a lot of ways it mirrors Jimmy Carter's economy, if you look at the actual statistics. The other thing is again, this sort of top-down wealth effect that was started with Obama. Is it trickling down to the masses? That's the question. Is it trickling down? I don't think, I studied a lot about during Reagan's administration. He had this sort of trickle-down theory as well, but is it trickling down? And that's sort of the question. I think we're hitting the statistics. GDP is growing, wage growth is growing, unemployment rate is low. We're not really growing personal consumption expenditures to what we should, given all the spending we've done, all the stimulus. But the question is it trickling down to the masses? And if we turn off the stimulus, what happens? If the economy is so great, why are we cutting taxes? Why are we suggesting that we cut interest rates? Why are we suggesting that the Fed stop unwinding its balance sheet if the economy is doing so great? So that's kind of like a disconnect there.
Well, I question the Fed, first of all, because they're really just printing the money. I mean, the Treasury prints it, but the Fed distributes it, so to speak. And it's not based on anything. It's just paper. But I think it's really people's perception of things. So, for example, New York, we have a $15 minimum wage?
Mm-hmm.
So when you get a $15 minimum wage increase to $15, two things take place. Historically, wages are the last thing to increase, and prices are the first thing. So there's no price freezes like under Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be price increases specifically and directly related to the wage increase. Two other things happen. The person who used to make less than $15 an hour is now going to pay, number one, a higher tax because he's making more money, but he's also in a different tax bracket. So he's going to pay a higher tax rate, not just a higher tax. So there's three things that's going to mess that up. And so what our perception is, we got a raise, and that's going to be fine for a very short time. But that raise will be consumed by those three factors. So what we really need for somebody who needs to earn more wealth is more buying power, and I don't think anything like that is being looked at. So it's perception. New York is great because the liberals gave us a higher minimum wage, but I think that's a mistake. That you'll see that will diminish. The buying power will diminish very quickly, and so we should look at buying power more than minimum wages. So I'm only pointing to that because it's people's perception of things. And it's perception of where we have our statistics, and they're very valuable, but the people that they think we have a democracy, for example. We don't even have a democracy, we have a republic. There's no subtle difference. We have a republic, and we don't vote on stuff, we vote for people, they vote on stuff, right? And how do you get on their radar? So again, I just say it's important, and I don't see it happening. It's an improvement or an increase in the data that gives people their perception.
Right.
I don't see that happening.
I think it's also it's perception and semantics. Where if the Fed, for instance, the Federal Reserve or the government says we're going to print money and we're going to raise asset prices to spread the economy back in 2008, 2009, you're basically favoring the investor class, people who either own the assets or have the cash to go to a pension fund. So we need to I want to raise $10 billion so I can buy assets. Because I hit the government buying assets. I want to raise $10 billion so I can start a real estate fund, start a private equity firm to buy assets. To get on the ground floor before the Fed starts spurring asset prices.
Yeah.
So the kids are looking at this and saying I think the people who own the assets now are saying that's capitalism. And then the kids are saying that's capitalism, we don't want that. So it's like, is that capitalism or is that socialism? Because that's what I think that's the debate.
Because it's a bad word. It's just like socialism, and nobody's breaking down what does that mean. Right now we have socialism for certain businesses because they're subsidized, right? So
Right.
That's socialism for the banks, or socialism for the war machine, or
Exactly.
socialism for that, but not socialism necessarily for the person that might need it more.
Right.
You know what I found interesting when you talk about, because when we do surveys, we talk to the average people, working people, and when you raise the minimum wage, you're right, they get taxed. And when they you see a lot of businesses where they're taking away the tips, and they're putting people on straight salaries. Now they get taxed.
Are they?
Yeah.
Everybody go to
So
they charge the gratuity right to the
the
places that go now. They charge it right to the
right. So who takes that? It's the restaurant owner, and they're paying the workers an average salary of $15, $20, whatever. Now the government's getting their FICA, and they don't take federal income taxes out of it because you're not at a level where you're qualified for federal taxes then. But the state is a flat tax.
Yes.
The city's a flat tax.
Yep.
And FICA, your Medicare post.
Paying it until you make a certain amount.
So now you're getting a higher per hour wage as far as the government's concerned, but they're taking a cut. Well, you used to, if you pay somebody a tip, $5 to $10, I don't know if they, I guess declared that. I loved it back in the 70s. The minimum wage was $1.35.
I remember when it was $1.35, $1.60.
But it was $1.35. But if you got a cash tip, may not have, you told the government you made X, or they really didn't care. And, since then they really care. But now it's like the hard part is you get working class people. It gets to a point, 15, 20 bucks. That's not that much, and the taxes, like you're saying, it's really regressive on that end.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, when they did the federal tax cut, they took a lot of people off the tax rolls and they lowered it more than the working end.
Yeah.
But the rich always have an accountant to figure it out. They always got, right, they got a depreciation, they got a thing. And, you're looking at the working people, I agree with you, it's not fair.
It's not fair.
But at least the difference is when we do focus groups with people, they'll say, we see help wanted signs. So they can move around. They're not worried about the plant moving or this, they don't feel real comfortable. But a few years ago, they were all worried. If you were like in certain parts of the country and it was an energy sector or it was meaning coal or whatever, they're worried about that or the factory going but now they say, we see help wanted signs, we feel more secure, and they're getting a bit of a pay raise.
They are. But can people afford to buy the products they're manufacturing?
Yeah, that's what Ralph said.
That's
That
the
actually
benchmark that nobody's asking.
That seems, if you take somebody who's in the coal industry
Yeah.
and they see a health wanted sign, are they getting any jobs?
Oh, they're working again.
Because the factories aren't reopening.
Oh, they are. They are. Like there are. There's factories reopening, and like you get Foxconn's going in Milwaukee. The one plant that GM shut down in Ohio, they're now announcing that they're going to replace with 3 other plants. Plus, there's a new plant coming in, and the guy from there are plants coming
So
in.
over the last 3, 5, whatever it is, period you want to choose, you're saying that more low-skilled jobs have been created than lost?
Those, by the way, these manufacturing jobs, and we do work for DNAM. They're not that low skilled.
That's why I don't know how to quantify low skill. I often hear them referred to as that, but I don't know how to quantify
But
it.
it's a manufacturing job. It's
I guess one of the issues there would be difference between college degree required and not.
Yeah.
Right. So a job that doesn't require a college degree, let's just define it like that. Have there been more created than lost over the last 3 to 5 years?
Well, I'm talking about like the last 2 years.
Okay. Over the last 2 years.
The last 2 years. So
have there been more created than lost?
yes.
So-
And by the way, it's not like you say. It's not necessarily even. Like you won't find those jobs here in New York City. I mean,
They haven't been in New York City.
right. You won't find those jobs in New York City, but you will find them in those exurban, rural parts of the country that 8 years ago they were mad, so they voted for Obama, and then 2 years or 10 years ago, and then 2 years ago they voted for Trump. In those parts of the country, it's growing again, and that's what I was saying. Not my numbers; it's Axios numbers. They put it out yesterday, and I was like, explains. See, I'm looking at it. You're an economist. I'm not. I got an MBA, but I got my finance quantitative. So I'm looking at the poll, and I'm saying, in certain parts of the country, this makes sense to me. So, like, and you're talking, you don't need a high school degree. Try to get a guy to drive a truck.
No, it's at college.
College
yeah.
degree. So some of them they'll take them without a high school degree
Right.
these days. But it's like certain parts of the country, like North Dakota, where they have the shale oil. They're paying $30, $40, $50 an hour to get drivers, and Western Pennsylvania, that's the case there. But upstate New York, they don't have that energy sector, so Elmira's dying.
That's also the other problem that, let's say, for instance, General Electric is having problems because they have so much debt that they have to pay the debt, and they're cutting jobs. They're trying to outsource some of the labor costs. They're trying to shutter businesses. So they closed a plant in Roanoke, Virginia. I grew up like 2 hours from Roanoke, and the workers' complaints is that these jobs are so highly skilled that there's no other place in that area in Roanoke, Virginia, that they can find a job that can pay them a wages to match this specialized skill they have. And if they get another job,
Highly skilled or highly specialized?
highly skilled. They have to leave. They would leave their hometown, all their friends and family. They would get a similar job. If they could find a similar job, it wouldn't be in Roanoke. It would be someplace else.
So I think also the distinction there isn't so much highly skilled, it just sounds highly specialized to me. And I think there's a distinction there between skills and specialization.
Well, I mean, when I say, to me, highly skilled, when you can do, somebody's been doing a job.
Because an electrician is highly skilled,
Right.
but he's highly specialized.
Right.
You can't, that doesn't translate necessarily to plumbing.
But they've been doing a job.
Yeah,
They've been doing this job for like,
Right.
15, 20 years, and they had to go.
And that's my thinking around like the replacement of jobs is if you're working in industries that are highly specialized, right? That creates a particular challenge in finding another job because you're not going to hire the machinist to do very many things that aren't related to specifically working with machines, which means your opportunity is highly limited.
Exactly. And some of the machines, actually, funny you mentioned, some of the machines are complaining that as General Electric's power business declines, there's less jobs for this machinist who took pride in his work, and maybe his son can become a machinist.
Right.
Someone who took,
Right. I mean, it's clearly highly skilled, but skilled and very specialized.
Right.
So the interesting thing is, can the lower level laborer afford to buy the products that he's producing? That would be a good benchmark for the growth of the economy all across the board.
Right.
Can't afford to buy what they're making.
But I think,
and is it useful?
I think some of the policies are similar to what happened in the Great Depression, where we were so busy trying to spur business, fixed investment. People, a bunch of auto companies expanding, but then nobody could afford to buy the product. So should you grow the consumer base or try to spur business, fixed investment?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Now I got an opinion, but I'd be interested in hearing what you said. Amazon pulling out of New York. Was that bad or good? I got my opinion, but you can get
It's short term is bad. I think you have some people who had their own self interest. A bunch of real estate people who were very upset about that. Can the government replace those jobs? Who knows? But I know that a lot of job growth in Northern Virginia, but it's also coming at a cost of Amazon pay taxes.
What jobs did they replace? Those jobs they didn't exist.
Okay.
They were theoretical jobs, so there's nothing to replace.
But I think people are looking at the lost income from all this these
theoretical
buildings going through. The price of real estate going, and the real estate brokers upset.
And I found it who cares? I found it interesting that Amazon left. I thought it was interesting because the question was, who would it create jobs for? Amazon's not hiring your typical. Well, I didn't track entirely what they were bringing in. Right. If it's Amazon, the tech company, bringing in programmers, that's a hugely different thing than Amazon, the warehouse, bringing in stockers. Right? And so who is Amazon bringing in? Who are they creating jobs for? What opportunity does it create? Right? I think New York is fairly saturated for programmers. I think programmers in New York City have lots of opportunity. Right? I think the opportunities that's needed, if it was a warehouse, if it was the next biggest warehouse in the country, that would have been a thing. Right? I think that might have created a lot of opportunity. But if they're bringing in their server farm, with the people to maintain the server farm, then does that really create true opportunity? Because all you're doing is hiring college grads from other cities to move in and drive up rent and drive up all the... So I actually thought that there was legitimate reasons for objecting to it if the perception is Amazon's bringing in highly paid tech people, a lot of them imported from other countries, because we have issues with finding enough people with engineering and programming and all of those sort of backgrounds. So the likelihood is, if they're coming in, again, I didn't track where they were bringing in the job, but if they're coming in at the tech company Amazon,
Right.
then they're not helping New Yorkers. They're not helping your run-of-the-mill New Yorkers. They're importing labor from other places, which is doing nothing but driving up
It's
costs.
just more of the distribution of all going in one place.
Right.
And not only that, the expense of the middle class taxpayer, because they're still getting fire, streets, cleaning,
Yes.
blah, blah.
And
They're
paying
getting the
taxes.
services, but they're not paying, they're getting tax abatements or tax forgiveness.
Right.
And that's costing somebody something.
Yes.
And that's the person that owns a house next door or something. So that's a bad scheme.
Right.
So how does New York fix? You got a big problem, night shift, right? the New York Housing Authority,
Yes.
and we've got a growing homeless population, which is really bad. To me, it's like, I haven't seen it like this bad with subways on the streets since like the 80s.
It's horrible.
Yeah,
You just don't see
it's-
the burnt out cars anymore. That's
Yeah, so how do you fix it? So it's like,
Well, I think the main thing is we got to look at unearned income, first of all. Unearned income should be heavily taxed. And so what I wrote about, and I wrote a recent article about affordable housing, and I just say,
but we're good at housing.
wait a minute, now, listen. We have, if you look at the initiatives in this country, it's all about raising the rent. And that's really secondary to lending, because everybody's always maxed out. Whether you're Harry McLaughlin, who had couple of $2 billion buildings, he was hedging those against buying another one, and he went bankrupt, right? So whatever your game is, you buy it. If you're a little guy, you buy a fixer-upper, you fix it up and you raise the rent. So the whole thing, the whole initiative is about raising rent. And so we talk about affordable housing. Those two are contraindicative, number one. Number two, when we look at if you look at, just a quick segue, there was a fellow named John Locke. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, right.
John Locke wrote Life, Liberty, and Property, and Jefferson wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness as well. Life, Liberty, and Property, when John Locke wrote that, he distinctly said, not land, but the result of your efforts. So your property is your efforts. So I would say that the wage tax should go way down, and what we have produced, those taxes should go down. And what is here that we did not produce is the land. So the land rent, and as a real estate appraiser, we used to appraise a property, and we extrapolate the building out. That's capital. We extrapolate it out, and we figured that's the land rent. Now in a city, you got 9 million people, that makes the land rent go up. That should be taxed higher than it is, and the tax on wages should go down. Right now, you make $1,000, you're paying $250 in tax. But the guy that owns the big pieces of land, he's not paying much in tax, and he gets a tax abatement. So if you look at it one step further, let's say a little piece of land, I can build 10 units. I'm oversimplifying. So I can build 10 units or according to zoning, but if you make it affordable, we'll let you build 14. So you're increasing the land value 40%, and you're not paying taxes for 40 years. Okay, that's a flaw, and that's revenue. That's the Real Estate Board of New York. They pay a lot to the campaign elections of some of our governors and mayors, for example. So there's one idea. They debunked the SRO. I remember as a kid there were movies about SROs. Now that was an SRO. This is going to answer to your question. There were hundreds of thousands of SROs that were debunked because revenue wants everybody to live in $1 million house and let the taxpayer pay for it if he can't afford it. But there used to be the little rooming house. There are hundreds of thousands of them, okay? So now, if you have that, they penalize you and they raise your taxes. More than you can believe, more than you can afford. Then they try to do affordable housing in an industrial way, like those projects that you're talking about. It's not meant to be that way. You can't just take everybody and dump them in one place.
Right.
So there's a 50 million people there, or, 25,000 people. They should be scattered throughout the community. They're members of the community. And so those SROs, what's wrong with a single adult living in a respectable room? Maybe you change it, each room has a bathroom, but they're willing to put them in a hotel and pay $1,000 or $200 a night, or $300, $400 a night. So one way to fix it is unearned income. When I can go to the bank, and I don't have much money, but I have credibility, and I go to the bank and borrow $10 million to build something, and the rent pays that back, I didn't really earn that. I finagled a way to make that happen. I mean, I'm oversimplifying. So that unearned income should be heavily taxed. That's it. Boom. That would answer a lot of questions. It would be a lot more funding of things, and that's one way. The second way is we have a debt economy, debt-based. Whether you're an Obama, and I voted for him twice, or whether you're a Clinton or a Reagan or a Bush, when we want to build infrastructure, which is a big mistake the way they're looking at it, we go to the bank and borrow the money. Okay? So right away, the guy that digs the ditches to build that, right, he has to pay part of his tax to pay the debt. Then he has to pay a toll to use that bridge, and then his rent goes up because the land is better because it links these two places. If Kucinich had a bill in front of Congress to make it a buy-in system. So the Fed prints the money was the debt. So if I were to say to you from an actuarial point of view, let's say it's $1 billion to build a bridge, okay? Let's say for oversimplification it'll take 2 years. That's 10 million a week, 1% a week, right? 100 weeks. So I could say I am making $10 million of wealth every week. So who does the lending here really, right? People that go to work a week or two, and then they get paid. So every week labor is lending their labor in the form of money, and I mean their money in the form of labor, right? So I can say, all right, steel guy, 30, 60, 90 days payment, right? So he's lending it. The concrete guy's lending it, a big account, I pay him every 30, 60, 90 days, revolving credit, right? So I can say, look, in 2 weeks I made $20 million of wealth. I can say it's non-inflationary because the wealth has been produced. So I'm lending money as a means of exchange, which is really what it is. I can lend that money, it's not a lend, I can pay it to people. I've created the wealth, right? So then the laborer buys clothing and tools and whatever he needs to buy, and it goes into the system that way instead of as a debt. And when that bridge is built, there's no debt on it. That's one way. That's another way you can do it. It changes the economy from fictitious, like the alchemy of turning seawater into gold. You know the old mythology. It's a buy-in system rather than a debt-based system. Right now, the debt-based system is equal to the gross national product.
He's got to run for mayor.
Yeah.
You got to run for mayor.
Okay, so that's
The politicians want to control that. I
De
don't.
Blasio's like term limited.
So let's segue to
This mayor's,
As merit.
So let's segue to the to Operation Varsity Blues, which is kind of similar to when we look at who can afford to go to elite colleges when they're raising the price of entry by making donations or either bribing some people to help bribing a fixer to help them get into certain schools. But at the end of the day, these slots for elite colleges are the price is either going up or the slots are becoming more limited or becoming fewer and fewer because people are figuring out how to game the system. So let's make a segue to that. So we'll start with Akil in terms of what do you think about the college admission scam? What does it say about the cost of college or the ability for certain kids to get into these elite schools?
Nothing. It says nothing. It says it's